Okay. Well, I'm wiped out. I had to clean up my wildflower gardens. Not easy with a walker. Anyways, Synchronicity, through the eyes of science, myth, and the trickster. Alan Combs, by Alan Combs and Mark Holland. I believe it's third edition. Here now, section 2. The part of section 2 is the trickster in the marketplace. Hermes' ability to reach through the cracks of ordinary reality makes connections between the known and the unknown. Arises in part, surprisingly, from his ancient role as patron of commerce. And Hermes the thief, classicist and student of Freud, Norman O. Brown notes that in primitive Greek villages and the marketplaces lay at borders between settlements. Quote, primitive trade on the boundary was deeply impregnated with magical notions, end quote. These notions expressed the mystery of exchange between a village and its unknown and usual feared neighbors. Hermes was the god associated with the exchanges made at the boundaries. Such exchanges were understood to be magical communications between the known of one's own village and the unknown of the alien village. And places sacred to Hermes, a person who wishes to trade would leave an object. The exchange would occur silently. The traders never actually meeting people returned later to find the goods for which they had traded. Even later, during classical times, the association of Hermes with the marketplace remained a remnant of this primitive form of trade. Hermes' place in ancient commerce illustrates his role in connecting the known with the unknown across borders. In larger terms, it demonstrates that his sphere of operation is not bounded by the known, but encompasses the totality of existence. Consequently, Hermes, the trickster, can be found symbolically wherever rigid notions of life exclude part of life's totality. He can appear at any boundary, including those we ourselves set, even unconsciously, or those set by our culture. The world of the modern mechanistic science is a world bounded by the rigid constraints of causality. It is the trickster's predilection to cross such boundaries, bringing the unexpected to the commonplace. His gift of synchronicity, however, seems dark, sinister, and threatening to that world because it appears to be an intrusion from an alien landscape, a world that mechanistic science cannot enter. Synchronicity plays the devil with the myth of causality. The expressions of the trickster who returns to us the life that our boundary making tries to exclude, rising a satanic specter in the eyes of science, or adversary, satanic, adversarial. Its qualities are the most offensive. It cannot be objectively tested. It makes itself unavailable for prediction and control. Synchronicity represents a hostile other because it is a causal. and as such blasphemes against the mythos of the causality principle. Slips of the tongue. Freud's notion of I can't say the word. All right. Sorry, MS. Although okay, let's say I can't blame it. I'm still got issues regardless. Parapraxis. Let's see if I can even pronounce it right, first of all. Parapraxis. Parapraxis? How to pronounce it? Parapraxis. Parapraxis. Freud's notion of parapraxis refers to the false but embarrassing acts commonly called Freudian slips. These often reveal hidden truths about our makeup, showing the human blunderer behind the smooth and ordered facade we project to others. Well, boy, I'm a prime example of that, ain't I? A student, for instance, was once sitting through a long and dry lecture when the classroom door blew open, letting in a cold draft. He explained, "Someone shut the door." We have all made such slips and can remember them with varying degrees of embarrassment or humor. If we understand the Freudian slip in Jung's terms, however, we are confronted again with the trickster who, manifesting his power through mistakes and slips, undercuts the boundaries we set for ourselves. When these boundaries fail, a gap opens between who we are on the one hand and who we are trying to be on the other. Through this gap slip the little accidents and mistakes which are the expressions of the trickster. Well, this trickster must be dominating my ass. Fuck. He can easily understand how our missteps result from our own imperfections, from pride, from a distorted or inaccurate sense of ourselves. But synchronistic events, in contrast, do not find seem to spring as clearly from our personal lives. Their meaning are rarely apparent. To understand the connection between parapraxis. Where am I at? I just lost my frickin'. To understand the connection between parapraxis and synchronicity, it is useful to examine the former in more detail. Let us begin by looking at the way meaning arises from classical parapraxis. And let's just go with it. Parapraxis, the slip of the tongue or pen, forgetfulness, misplacement of objects, or the other error through thought to reveal unconscious wishes or attitude. So once again, the slip of the tongue or pen, forgetfulness, misplacement of objects, or other error through thought to reveal unconscious wishes and attitudes. Yeah. One of the authors once heard an aging professor give a highly creative talk on the meaning of Ingmar Bergman's book, Wild Strawberries. The audience was enthralled. In the excitement of the applause that followed, he stepped forward and exclaimed, "See, as I grow older, my procreative creative powers grow greater and greater." Emphasis added. A slip of the tongue may reveal its meaning in terms of unconscious psychological or emotional needs. This slip, which without knowing the psychology we would take simply as nonsensical, is not difficult to understand in terms of the speaker's fear of the loss of sexual potency as he approaches old age. Such slips unveil a connection between the world of our day-to-day identity and often hidden world of emotions, like parapraxis, Synchronistic events also connect difficult worlds, the world of everyday reality with the world of the mythic realms of the unconscious. Jung's notion of synchronicity is based on the idea that when unconscious mind is stimulated powerfully in one direction, there is a corresponding lowering of mental energy elsewhere. This frees up the psychoid, or the undifferentiated level of the mind. This primitive level is free of ordinary restraints, which separate the mind from connections with the external world. When such connections are made, they are made in the form of synchronistic events, as is the case with Freudian slips. A strong emotion or a powerful surge of mental energy can make possible this synchronistic event. Let us consider, for instance, of each. One famous clinical case of Freud's involved a well-to-do young woman who was suffering from hysterical blindness. That is, her blindness was due to a neurosis and not a neurological disorder. All that could be established regarding the events surrounding the onset of blindness was that they involved the death of her father in a Protestant hospital in Italy. Something was wrong with the story, however. She could not supply the needed answer. That is, not until she slipped one day and referred to the nurse as prostitutes instead of Protestants. She corrected herself immediately, but the cat was already out of the bag. Her father had in fact died in a brothel in the arms of a prostitute. She had been forced to come to the brothel to identify the body. The emotional aftermath of this incident caused her to repress the whole affair and produce her blindness. The emotional charge she was left with, however, opened the gap from the slip of the tongue and provided Freud with a badly needed clue about the real cause of the neurosis. Mary-Louise von Franz, speaking about synchronicity, tells the story of a man who's suffering from a psychotic idea that he was the savior of the world, attacked his wife with an axe to exorcise the devil out of her. She called for help. At that instance, a policeman and a psychiatrist entered the house. The single electric lamp that lit up the passage where they all stood exploded. They found themselves in darkness, covered with fragments of broken glass. The man immediately declared, "See, this is like it was at the crucifixion of Christ. The sun has eclipsed. He took this as confirmation that he was the Savior. Von Franz, however, points out that the light bulb is not the sun, the luminous source of higher consciousness. It is rather a small light made by man, symbolizing his ego. From this view, the real meaning of the event is evident. The explosion of the bulb reflected the collapse of the man's ego. The event, and in this case, is speaking the language of dreams, showing the man, could he only see it, exactly what he was blind to in his psychotic state. Needless to say, his mental state was highly energized at the moment of the incident. While connections of psychic energy do not, in the usual sense, cause synchronistic events, in Jung's model, they do allow them to occur. The meaningfulness which gives the synchronistic event its special character arises from the symbolic connectedness between elements and the deep layers of the psyche and some situation in the external world. The synchronistic event is independent of the mental situation which allows it, because the connection between an emotional surge in the psyche and the situation outside is caused neither by the internal nor the external arrangement of things. Rather, the outside event and the inner psychological one, the emotion, the complex, the concentration of energy, unfold simultaneously. The two events, one inner and one outer, connect not by virtue of one causing the other, but by a mutual reflection of a common meaning. Such a connection recalls the medieval notions of the sympathetic resonance. It also recalls Bohm's notion that the implicate order unfolds patterns of meaning into the implicate, and ultimately the explicate order of reality. In Chapter 2, we suggested that such patterns may take on a variety of forms and simultaneously, some physical and some mental. We will return to the notion again in Chapter 6. When an individual's inner life corresponds in a symbolic way to the other objective world, the two are connected by meaning, and since this connection is acausal, it appears accidental, an unexpected interruption or intrusion breaking into the normal order of things. Here precisely is the trickster, revealing meaning in his typical unorthodox way. The trickster in Africa. Through synchronistic coincidences, the trickster can sometimes confront us with what we do not know about ourselves, but must recognize if we are to know the whole of our reality. Canadian priest and student of African culture Robert Pelton and the trickster in West Africa refers to the trickster god of the Ashanti people, Ennis, or pure synchronicity. Ennis introduces into human culture ways of seeing that have remained hidden or left out. The trickster, however, works in his own distinct way. Pelton notes that Ennis, like Coyote or Hermes, does not act from noble motives, but by a rational, straightforward method, but by faithful following his own way of making connections, by shattering the accepted boundaries of language, action, and even modes of being. As a creature without boundaries, his existence and activity are never absolutely fixed in place. He makes connections across the limits we ordinarily set for life, bringing together polar opposites and disclosing that which is hidden. Pelton tells a tale of another West African trickster, Ishu, who plays a prank on two farmers. His joke reveals an important inadequacy in the relationship between these friends. Once two friends owned adjoining farms. They dressed alike and were in all ways a model of friendship. Ishu decided to make them differ. He used to walk each morning on a path between the two farms. One day set out wearing a multicolored cap and let his staff hang over his back instead of his chest. He greeted the friends already working in the fields and passed on. Later they began to argue about the color of his cap, which way he was going, and one version of the story issue returned at this point and walking the other way. This led the farmers to an animated argument, each insisting that the other had been right in the first time. Soon they came to blows. When they were brought before the king, Ishu confessed to igniting the quarrel because sowing dissension is my great delight. When the king tried to bind Ishu, he fled, started a fire in the brush, hurled burning grass on the town, and they mixed up the possessions that the town folks hauled out in their out of their houses. A dreadful row began, and as Ishu ran off laughing, he boasted to everyone he had played his game well. Pelton notes that in this story, the trickster points out the animosity which underlies the idolized friendship of the two farmers, always acting from a stereotyped model of friendship. They come to blows when the trickster walks the boundary to symbolically separates their identities. So in spite of their shared and accurate perceptions, they disagree about the trickster because neither of them can encompass the other's vision. They notice Ishu's clothing, his staff, his pipe, but neither really sees his movement and what the other sees. Further, Ishu brings a dispute into this society where even the king cannot control the trickster, as he mixed up the boundaries between the villagers' possessions. The dissension of the trickster sows brings into focus the boundaries between people and the price that is paid for repressing or ignoring these boundaries in the name of idolized friendship or goodwill. As we know, even best friends don't always get along. Apparently, the two farmers and the extension of the society had forgotten their real underlying differences. This state of affairs attracted the notice of Ishu, whose game, after all is said and done, restores the culture of a healthier, more realistic attitude towards human relations. This trickster is in this story accomplishes his effect symbolically by wearing backward the symbols of manhood. the staff and the pipe, and by burning the people's houses and mixing up their possessions, both of which represent their individual identities. His effect appears chaotic, but that is only because it compensates for the repressive imbalance of too much order, as symbolized in the story by idealized friendship of the two farmers. The trickster first appears on the borderline and threshold between two individual identities. He belongs, however, outside the normal social order, as his disruption of the king's attempt to settle the dispute shows. His trickery comes as a visitation from outside, though from a psychological point of view, it was invented, so to speak, by the internal psychology of the two farmers. There is a paradox in the trickster's nature. He can encompass opposites by bringing together both the conscious and unconscious characteristics of the farmers and the villagers. The story also shows the trickster involvement in a further paradox. It shows him making the world as it already is, not as the two farmers have idealized it. The trickster-like, he accomplishes this feat for his own selfish ends. The trickster in the modern world. In our culture, the notion that we can understand our lives by tracing all events and situations to understandable causes has become a powerful obstacle to confronting relationships unconnected by chains of cause and effect. Thus, we are often oblivious to meaningful coincidences, even when they are striking, thinking them no more than are shared of chance. Statisticians encourage this view, however. This attitude is a holdover from the Newtonian mythos, in which people are seen as analogous. Okay, can't say the word. Sure enough, when I've read it before, said it before, and for somebody right now, if anybody does listen, say, that's how you say it. And I'm like, I know.
Analogous.
Why couldn't I say it? Because of goddamn mess. I've been told from a person that doesn't know much about it that we can't blame everything on MS, but man, it does interfere with speech. It just does. I'm not the only one that has to deal with it. But I also know that I have to force myself to do this, because if I don't do this, A, I'm not going to be learning as much as I could, and B, I need to use my mouth. And since there's not a lot of people to talk to about anything, even on like platforms like TikTok and all it is arguments, and the more powerful personality is going to take over the conversation, and they're going to steer it the way they want to steer it. And if you don't want to talk about the nonsense they talk about, then what else can you do? So this is my attempt to basically pretend I'm having a conversation with somebody. Hopefully there's somebody at the end hears it. It's a monologue, unfortunately, but it is what it is. So maybe someday I will find a few people where you can have these kind of conversations. But the thing is, how much do I really have to offer anyways at this point? I don't know. This isn't really that important, I don't think. So anyways, in this attitude, a holdover from the Newtonian mythos, in which people are seen as
analogous
to atoms that are knocked about by random Brownian motion, forming brief, elusive, and seemingly intelligent patterns, but at root amounting to nothing but dust devils of perception. This attitude throws up a wall against the irrational part of life, closing us off from the symbolic meaning. Few would suggest that significant coincidences never occur by chance alone, not even Carl Jung himself. I don't know how to pronounce that. Adora Bindo, the great Indian yogi. So Bindo, the great Indian yogi and sage, for instance, once wrote, "The figure of the world reveals the signs of a tide chance repeating her old steps in circles around matters binding post, a random series of inept events, to which reason lends elusive sense is here." That sucked. The Sarai Aurobindo did not mean that all or even most coincidences are inept events to which reason lends elusive sense. To come to such a conclusion would be like seeing a man picking up coins from the street and assuming that all of his money was acquired in this way. Perhaps we also tend to overlook synchronicity because it is a symbolic form of expression. And we simply do not understand it. Symbols are at best difficult to understand because their meaning is open to a variety of interpretations. And can never be completely grasped. Unlike allegories, which have fixed and entirely comprehensible meaning, synchronistic events are symbolic. They are not, in the end, reductible. I guess. Reductible? Is that what this means? I don't know if that's spelled right. I think there's a bit of an error there. Reductible to any form of expression. Reducible? I think maybe that's what it meant to be. Reducible. It's just got a... I don't know what that is. So we'll say this. The comprehensible meaning of synchronistic events are symbolic, and they are not, in the end, reducible to any form of expression other than that which they originally take. We can gain insight into the symbolic meaning of a particular synchronistic event or dream, but it will still retain something of the mystery that belongs to the truly numinous. Such numinosity indicates the source of both symbols and synchronicity in the depths of the chthonic underworld. Chthonic underworld, from and to which Hermes is the messenger. Because symbols and symbolic events are rooted in the underworld, even the most careful and painstaking examination can never reduce their mystery, the mystery of life, to a rational equation. This very fact gives synchronicity both its irritating and its enchanting qualities reflected in the characteristics of the bringer of both good luck and bad, the trickster. The symbolic meaning of the synchronistic event arises from the correspondence between the deepest layers of the human mind, about which we really know very little, and an external world in which final causes remain, at best, a mystery to us. A synchronistic event points to the correspondence between two deep mysteries, exposing a connection between them in symbolic form. We live in a world in which, for the last 50 or 60 years, it's much longer now, 100 and some years, see this, yeah, it'd be 100 years, subatomic physics has described a universe founded at the bottom on causal connections. Okay. On paradoxical and seemingly illogical relationships and observations. Yet, as a culture, we still deny causal symbolic connections as part of our lives and the lives of our souls. As a result, the trickster continues to play the devil with us, continually upsetting with his sudden windfalls. The ancient Greeks referred to this offering left at roadside herms as hermanion, or windfall. The rigid notion that everything is explicable in terms of cause and effect, that everything can be understood by the rational faculty, by the rational faculty. This trickster puts life in our path in spite of our denials. We continue to stumble over his gifts, ignoring their disturbing nature when our luck is good, cursing some vague fate when our luck is bad. As Pelton observes, the trickster enters the human world to make things happen, to break and reestablish relationships, to reawaken consciousness of the presence and the creative power of both the sacred center and the formless outside. Then he returns to that hidden threshold which he embodies and makes available as a passage to save people from ruin. Hermes and Ananias, Coyote, the tricksters, by any name, bring the divine world, both within and without, into the human life for passing through the hidden boundaries which we create and yet remain unaware of. Through the trickster's play, we enter myth, the imaginary awareness of life that answers questions about who we are, where we have come from, and where we are going. This entrance we make symbolically, though through causal connections. The synchronicity that is the gift of the trickster. And that's the end of that. I guess we section 4. We're in section 4 now. Man, I got this. The way this thing's all set up, I got it all wrong. It doesn't really matter. We'll just say. That was in section 5. Did I say 4? Fuck. We are now in section 6, once again, of the book Through the Eyes of Science, Myth, and the Trickster, Synchronicity, by, once again, Alan Combs and Mark Holland. Section 6 is the meaning and synchronicity. If you stand right fronting and face to face to a fact, you will see the sun glimmer on both its surfaces, as if it were a scimitar. What the hell is that? Don't know. Let's find out. Scimitar. See if I can pronounce it right, first of all.
Scimitar.
Scimitar. No, scimitar. Sounds like scimitar, so the C is silent. And meaning of a scimitar is a short sword with a curved blade that broadens towards the point, used originally in Eastern countries. A scimitar.
Scimitar.
I never would have thought of it as scimitar. Okay, so it's as if it were a scimitar, a short sword, and feel its sweet edge dividing you through the heart and marrow, so you will happily conclude your mortal career. Be it life or death, we crave only reality. Henry Thoreau, Walden, Lighten Up, Thomas Robbins, Jitterberg's Profane. That's what it says there. So, the synchronistic coincidences are always personal events. The fascination of synchronicity is to be found in the feeling that each coincidence speaks to us individually as we have seen. However, the meaning of the message is often far from obvious, perhaps because synchronistic coincidences are objective events that symbolically seem to mirror personal, subjective realities. They are often difficult to comprehend. To understand them, we must seek a knowledge that binds together the objective world of physical events with the inner personal world of subjective reality. David Bohm's notion of the implicate order does this to a degree, but his theory is new and still inarticulate in dealing with a personal meaning. Carl Jung's thought is strong just where Bohm's is weak. Jung's ideas provide a rich understanding of interpersonal and psychological meaning, especially in the realm of archetypical patterns, while at the deepest psychoid level, they participate in the unus mundus, one world beyond all separation, into subjectivity and objective. How do I get that? So just subjective and objective realities. At root, archetypes touch the unus mundus, carrying into the psychological life of each individual the mythological motifs that characterize them. One archetype that we have already looked at in some detail is the particular importance to synchronicity, the archetype of the trickster. He is the mythic embodiment of the unexpected. He symbolizes the unexpected eruptions into awareness of truths hidden away from the ego. In the psychological sense, the trickster is the one mode by which other archetypes, such as the archetype of the self, asserts themselves. For instance, Hermes was both a messenger of the gods' archetypes and herald to them. He was always depicted carrying the herald's staff. Thus, he brings news of the gods' wishes, and he also heralds their coming. On a psychological level, synchronicity plays both of these roles of force archetypes. Synchronicity can signify the unconscious activity of an archetype and herald its arrival as a powerful influence in the individual's consciousness. After completing his essay on synchronicity, Jung saw a vision of a trickster on a wall of his Bollingen house, a vision he later carved in stone. This appearance of the trickster is characteristic of his style. He pops up unexpectedly. The quality of that he brings to synchronicity, however, is not simply that of surprise. His manner has the impish charm of cunning and magic. There is a flavor of roguish enchantment to the situation he orchestrates. American Indian tricksters were frequently known as delight makers in honor of this winsome deviltry. This mysterious side is seen in Hermes, who was often associated with the night and the sense of magic that can accompany the night. This sense, however, is not limited to the night alone, but can also appear by day as a sudden darkening or an enigmatic smile. This mystery of the night seen by day, this magic darkness in the bright sunlight, is the realm of Hermes. One has the feeling that the synchronicity the trickster engages in the fabulous play of the divine jester. He is a juggler of reality. It is in the notion of play we believe that we may find the key to understanding our best relationships to the trickster and thus to synchronicity. It is also the key to discovering his divinity in ourselves. In this concluding chapter, we will see that the trickster is capable of as many varieties of play as there are varieties of synchronicity. As a messenger and herald, he represents the interest of a considerable range of unconsciousness and mythic figures. The most roguish play of the trickster, however, is the role of the prankster. Here he sticks us with one after another of those annoying stumblebum coincidences. Is that sort of stumblebum? I never heard of that. Stumblebum coincidences, known in German as monkey tricks. In these, the trickster acts on behalf of an unconscious structure known as the shadow play. The shadow is Jung's term for the flip side of the outward personality that each of us has crafted for the benefit of others as well as for ourselves. Jung termed this outward personality as persona, the name used for the mask worn by actors in ancient Greek dramas. Actors did not communicate their mode directly by their facial expressions, as is done in theater today, but rather by wearing masks. The shadow, on the other hand, it is made up of those personal qualities we most vigorously resist admitting about ourselves. Ironically, these are often the very qualities that we intensely dislike in others. Try bringing into mind for example, a person whom you dislike with particular intensity. If you can provide a description of that individual, you almost certainly may read it in the characteristics of your own shadow. The strong emotion you feel towards the other person indicates the presence of the shadow and projection as those traits which you have represented just for what you believe are the best of reasons. In most technical language, the shadow consists of those qualities in ourselves. In more technical language, the shadow consists of those qualities in ourselves which we repress or at least deny most of the time for the sake of the ego ideal. All those learned values, both conscious and unconscious, which we have been raised to accept as forming a proper guide to our behavior and our identities. Normally, one thinks of the shadow as embodying the most undesirable features of the personality, and this is usually the case. Indeed, the most positive person can sometimes hide the most negative shadow. A charming individual may hide an extremely critical side as well as keeping a bad temper under wraps. On the other hand, it is possible to have a shadow that is more positive than the persona. This situation occurs when someone actually identifies with the undesirable characteristics in his own personality. Part of the appeal of the Humphrey Bogart, for instance, was his tender, caring shadow, all too visible under his tough guy persona. The personal shadow of each of us, which we have been discussing so far and which is formed from our own personal history and psychological makeup, is part of a larger mythic and archetypical shadow which belongs to the unconscious. When we project our personal shadow onto others, seeing in them our own concealed nature, or when we likewise project it onto the world in inanimate objects, we reduce our awareness of ourselves to the degree that the personal shadow may become enlivened by the archetypical likeness, by its archetypical likeness. It then acquires a life of its own, often taking on the aspects of the prankster and playing tricks on us. Since our personal shadow, in fact, is nothing more than an odds and ends collection of traits that we have failed to fuse into our conscious persona, the tricks played by this prankster are likewise disorganized. We find ourselves experiencing a day in which, to use Jung's words, everything goes wrong and nothing intelligent happens except by chance. We are beset by one trifling difficulty after another. The sheer number that can be packed into the first few hours of the day is astonishing. We say we are having one of those days. At such times, all phone calls connect to busy lines. The car needs gas. The weather is terrible, and the umbrella is at the office. The traffic lights are all red. It is just this variety of bad luck that eventually inspired Murphy's Law, which states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. There are numerous correlations. For instance, if a slice of bread falls on the floor, it will always land butter side down. One of the authors likes to refer to such coincidences as perverse synchronicity. What can be done at times like this? Maria Louise von Franz observes that such times one is, in a sense, outside of oneself. In most cases, the solution then is simply to relax and get back in touch. Monkey tricks typically happen when one is in a hurry and besides oneself. The key is to relax into the moment. Realize that life will not end if the next stoplight turns red, and try to be centered on yourself. Doing this can lead to surprising results. You may find, for instance, that the tricks are actually not so bad. Often, regaining our composure, you often discover that each trick is followed in time by another coincidence that provides a solution to it. How many times, for example, have you had something go wrong with a car, then discover with relief that you were remarkably near a garage where it could be fixed? In the service of the chateau, however, the prankster can be more than a petty nuisance. If a major part of the personality is barred from consciousness so that it is banished to the shadow, the consequences can be serious psychological problems as well as abundant synchronicity of the prankster variety. A case in point was Jung's own friend Wolfgang Pauli, who, it turns out, was strongly disposed to the intellectual side of his personality, much to the expense of his feelings. The latter were often relegated to his chateau. In Pauli's case, thought had dominated feeling, so that the emotions were relegated to what Jung termed the shadow. Thought, sensing what it felt to be primitive forces at work, put the lid on even tighter so that feelings found itself in the possession of a red-hot pressure cooker with the valve jammed. What resulted was an utterly disrupted personal life, vehement and unnecessary sarcastic attacks on fellow scientists, and frequent bouts of drunkenness. What also resulted was the famous Pauli effect by which delicate laboratory instrumentation collapsed upon Pauli's mere appearance. Hermes the thief. The trickster's play frequently gives us opportunity, usually unwelcome, for personal growth by flaunting our most private secrets for the whole world to see. This seems to be the trickster's delight. Wearing a cloak of the shadow itself, he exposes its secrets through synchronistic coincidences, putting them out in public where we meet them head on. Thus, the play of the trickster makes us confront our own faults in the everyday world, much as we are forced to confront them in our dreams. These instances offer the opportunity to recognize our faults and by owning them, to take away their sting, and in the barrage render ourselves more whole. They say bargain, and in the bargain render ourselves more whole. Look, like tricksters, in many cultures, Hermes is the archetypical thief stealing our purposes and turning them to the service of his own trickery. Just when we want to make our best impression, for example, we make some silly mistake, mispronounce the name, spill the coffee, do little embarrassing things. This is the trickster as the shadow, stealing our purpose when we want to appear flawless, just to amuse himself with our foolishness. If we are open to this impish play, we realize that we have been reminded that we are only human, that we have limitations no matter how perfect we might wish to appear. Interestingly, theft as a means of wholeness is not unknown, even on the social level. According to Norman O. Brown, in some cultures, thievery is an accepted form of exchanging goods and is distinguished from robbery and burglary. In some cultures, it is the custom to take certain objects that one likes from another's home. It is as if you were visiting a friend and saw an attractive vase on the mantelpiece. You could simply take the vase home with you and act an act of thievery that would be acceptable to everyone in that community. The practice reinforces the bonds between members of the community and serves to strengthen everyone's sense of belonging. In similar legitimate forms of theft can also be found in one of the ancient Greek festivals of Hermes. On Samos, at the feast of Hermes Charidots? Is that your pronounce? Charidots. Where the populace was allowed to steal and to commit highway robbery. In these customs, we see the selfish act can create some good for everyone. The desire to possess something for oneself becomes a way of strengthening the communal bond through exchange and by reminding people that distractions based on property are always, in some sense, artificial. Besides, the point in the context to everyone's shared humanity and mortality. Typically, we miss the opportunities for greater psychological wholeness provided synchronistically by the trickster as shadow because we are too busy protecting ourselves by projecting the problem outward onto others and onto a hostile fate. When this happens, the trickster may put the problem before us again and again, and despite our mounting frustration, force us finally to deal with it. In such cases, like me gardening today, it makes that I've been putting that off for a while, and I didn't. My wildflower gardens are a bit of a mess. Yeah. In such cases, though, the trickster acts for himself. As it were, we can detect behind him the directing power of the archetype of the self, which would move the psyche as a whole to greater maturity. Our persistent encounter with the shadow is colorfully portrayed in a Persian tale of Abu Qasim's slippers. These slippers were famous in all of Baghdad, as famous as their tight-fisted owner. Abu Qasim himself, for though Abu Qasim was wealthy, he was a miser, and the extraordinarily shabby state of his slippers portrayed his own nature. all too well. The poorest beggar in town would have been ashamed to be seen wearing them. One day, Abu Qasim completed an unusually lucrative business deal by which he obtained a quantity of fine attar of roses from a bankrupt perfume merchant, as well as a set of choice crystal bottles to decant in it. To celebrate, he treated himself to a rare visit to the public baths. There, his disgusting slippers were so conspicuous that an irate fellow merchant lectured him on the disgrace they brought to his name. Abu Qasim, however, replied that the slippers were really not so badly worn that he could not use them. Later, while he was in the bath, an illustrious judge arrived and left his clothes near Qasim's garments as he entered the bath. Upon leaving, Abu Qasim discovered an excellent new pair of slippers in the very place he left his own, or at least at almost the very place. Evidently, his irate companion had done him a good turn and replaced the old ones for him. He slipped on the fine new slippers and left. The judge, however, upon preparing to leave the baths, was beside himself. His slave looked everywhere for his slippers, but located only the disgusting pair, which everyone knew belonged to Abu Qasim. The judge wasted no time hauling Abu Qasim into court, and knowing that he was rich, and fined him heavily. This apparently was enough for Abu Qasim. In a fit of temper, he decided to get rid of the slippers, hurling them out of the window, where they fell with a splash into the river Tigris, which followed muddily by his house. A few days later, they tangled and ripped the net of a local fisherman who, recognizing the revolting things, flung them back through Casman's window, where they landed with a crash on a table, breaking the crystal bottles to pieces and spilling the perfume out into a soggy mess mixed with the mud from the slippers. Abu Qasim was enraged. Determined to rid himself of the slippers, he carried them to his garden, where he proceeded to bury them in the ground. A neighbor, however, observed him digging and concluded that he had treasure buried there. As the earth and everything in it belongs by law to the caliph, the neighbor, being no friend of Abu Qasim, took himself off to the governor's palace to report the matter. Abu Qasim was quickly called before the governor to account for himself, but no one would believe his preposterous stories about the slippers. He was again given a heavy fine. Desperate to rid himself of the accursed things, Abu Qasim carried the slippers out into the country and threw them into a pond, watching them sinking towards the bottom. Unfortunately for him, however, the pond was part of the water supply of Baghdad, and the slippers swirled to the mouth of the pipe and stopped it up. The city workers, whose job was to unclog the pipe, instantly recognized the slippers and reported Abu Qasim to the governor for befouling the city waters. Abu Qasim was again forced to pay a large fine. Now, very nearly broke, and at the state of despair, Abu Qasim decided to burn the damn things. He set them out on his balcony to dry, but a dog snatched one of them and played with it and dropped it down to the street below, where it struck a pregnant woman on the head, causing her to miscarry. Her husband ran to the judge to demand recompense. Abu Qasim, now a broken man, was forced to pay. Before leaving the court, however, he raised the terrible slippers and cried, "My Lord, these slippers are the fateful cause of all my suffering. These cursed things have reduced me to beggary, designed to command that I have never again be held responsible for the evils they will most certainly continue to bring upon my head." It was said the judge could not reject this plea, and so ends the story. What does the tale mean? It can be read on a variety of levels, but our interest is in the trickster and the shadow. The slippers are, if nothing else, an outward sign of Abu Qasim's own miserliness and a miserliness that he himself is prone to deny, though it is all too apparent to the rest of the world. Even when confronted directly in public baths about the slippers' dreadful conditions, he attempts to minimize it, saying that they are not so bad that he cannot use them. He will not admit to this important, indeed central part of his own character. He has relegated his close-fittedness to the shadow. As a result of this denial, the trickster steals Abu Qasim's purpose and turns it to his own ends. Thus is Abu Qasim confronted with his own shadow, and opportunity for greater insight into his own real nature. We must realize that the shadow is not made up entirely of deeply repressed material. Much of it consists of personal qualities we simply will not face up to in ourselves. Miserliness can be such a quality. We rarely admit our own stinginess, even to ourselves, and when it becomes an obsession, we admit it even less. Abu Qasim was a miser, but he was not forced to confront his own close-fisted nature until the incident at the public baths, when his companion lectured him on the state of his slippers, that is, upon his miserliness. His loathing to admit this basic part of himself is the opening for the trickster to steal Abu Qasim's own defense and turn it from a denial of the shadow into a series of troubles of the sort the trickster enjoys. He does so, first of all, in a fashion reminiscent of the West African trickster, by mixing up Abu Qasim's personal items with those of the great judge. Had Abu Qasim been wearing slippers appropriate to his own wealth, the problem would have been minor, but this was not the case. The result was the first of many terrible fines that he would have to pay. The severe consequences of the event at the baths should have been enough to cause Abu Qasim to admit his miserly nature, but his habit of denial was deep, so insisted And so and instead he tried to toss it off literally by throwing the slippers out the window. This did not work, as the synchronistic trickster intervened with dire effect. Now Abulkazim gets serious about covering up his flaw. He first tries to bury the slippers in the ground, and later by burying them under the water at the bottom of the pond, efforts which suggest that he is attempting to shove the whole business back down into the unconscious. And none of this works. Of course, the trickster will not allow it. The final effort to rid himself of the slippers by burning them seems more authentic than the previous ones. The metaphor of burning away one's obsessions is a common one, but Abulkazim's habit is too strong, and even this does not work for him. Nevertheless, we see that after this first sincere effort, the judge takes some pity on him, agreeing not to hold him responsible for the further pranks of the slippers. Following the effort to burn them, this decision seems much like that of a modern judge who resolves to overlook certain offenses if the accused is making a serious effort to change. That's a pretty good place to stop.